Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A relatively uplifting comment today. Let's do it. What's the first thing you did on the day you got released from prison? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Not me, but my best friend. He was in for 6 years. I picked him up and drove him to his parents' house. They shut the door in our faces after saying they didn't want any association with him. I drove him all around evening time after he said he didn't feel like eating. Then I took him to my home, made him shower, gave him fresh clothes, and offered food. He said he just needed some sleep, so I left him alone. Wrong decision. I found him lying in a pool of blood when I went to check on him in the middle of the night. He had tried to commit suicide, called emergency, who whisked him away. He drove to his parents' place and informed them. They rushed to the hospital promptly. This was 5 years ago. He's been doing okay since. He has a great new job and a fiancé. Gets along well with his parents, too. Discharge takes forever. You put your street clothes back on, and then the waiting game starts. They took me down to the holding cells to be discharged at around 9 a.m., and I wasn't actually let out of jail until around 2 in the afternoon. My dad picked me up, and we went straight to IHOP. I had an omelet and 2 stacks of pancakes, irrelevant, but I clearly remember sending my coffee cup back for another one because there were lipstick stains on it from the last person. Anyway, then on to the entire ride home, we blasted the John Mayer Trio's live CD. It was effing glorious. I couldn't afford the crazy expensive personal radio from the commissary while I was in there, so it was my first music I heard in months. I just took in the scenery and fresh air the entire time. Then when we finally got home, I remember just a weird feeling when I walked into my house. I kept just thinking to myself, I can't believe how weird it feels to not be told what to do or watch. Another thing I clearly remember was how weird it felt the first time I walked into my bedroom. The entire room seemed bigger than I remembered it. Everything just seemed oddly different. Then my girlfriend at the time took me out to Ruby Tuesdays for dinner, then took me to her house to see her parents. Nope. She had 12 of my friends hiding in her living room to surprise the shit out of me. We all just hung out, drank beers, and played pool in her basement till midnight. Her mom made me this awesome cake shaped like an Xbox 360 controller that said, "The future is in your hands" on it. Obviously, my girlfriend then came back to my house with me and welcomed me home properly. Readjusting to freedom was a huge shock to the system. It took a few days. This was 5 years ago, and I've had no legal troubles since. After I got back to the house and was sitting on the back porch talking with friends, I decided to run in one direction and run fast. There was nothing but a huge field behind our house, and I hopped the fence and just booked it. My friends were whooping and hollering and cheering for me as I ran. It was amazing. I was locked up in a juvenile detention when I was 14 to 15. Don't think that would technically be a convict. However, it was a prison, and when I was let out, my father picked me up and took me to the lake we used to do a lot of boating and skiing at. There was a camp already set up with the boat and everything, and all my buddies were there waiting and having a good time. It felt strange to be in such a beautiful and fun place with all your friends in the beautiful California sun after being locked up and depressed for such a long time. At first I wanted to hide and drown in my own self-pity. Then after a time I said, today's the day I learned how to barefoot. And that was exactly how I spent the entire day. By the end of the day I had figured it out the hard way, being dragged out of the water behind a boat that really wasn't powerful enough and rolling around on your back and spinning to get up on my feet. I think my dad spent $100 on gas that day, but he didn't care. He just wanted me to be happy. I was very sore and battered, but I was able to leave all the shit behind me and start off again on toward the rest of my life. UK, 2003. I was out clubbing a few years back in Bristol and felt ill in the club. A friend took me to the train station and put me on a train going in the opposite direction to where I live. I ended up stranded in Wales. Had to wait overnight in the waiting room on the platform. I got chatting with 2 guys who were already in there. One was getting the first train to Weymouth to tell the girl he was wrong and that he loved her. The other was a guy just out of prison and was riding the trains up and down the country just because he could. We smoked hash and swapped stories through the night. How awesome getting the wrong train can be sometimes. I was arrested and charged with second-degree assault with a deadly weapon. I was sentenced to less than 2 years of prison time because the judge saw extenuating circumstances, since the man I had stabbed was a date artist and there were multiple witnesses to say so. I got out in 2010. I was 21 and had seen my birthday pass on the inside. I got out and my family picked me up and we all went out to celebrate. I had about 6 pints of real beer and at least 45 wings, maybe more. About an hour later at the house, I blew massive chunks. A straight deluge of vomit. My pop said he had something that would help. We went out to the yard, and for the first time in my life, me and my father smoked pot together. He told me that he was proud of me, and that I did the right thing. Then I passed out. Edit. Took stairs formatting advice. Edit. To expand a little bit, yes, I would do something different. I wouldn't have used a weapon. I would have removed him from the bedroom physically instead. I'm now a felon, and a violent felon at that. So with that record, it's made a difficult life for me and my family since my release. Edit. Sorry if this runs a little long, but it appears people want to know what happened. This is what happened the night I was arrested. Me and the man I stabbed, we'll call him Jason, were at the same party one evening. He'd always been creepy, but left me and my friends alone, so it was whatever. Anyway, part of the way through the night, I watched him carry an obviously unconscious girl to the bedroom of the apartment we were in. Some other people saw but didn't do anything, so I felt like I needed to. My father always taught me that if something like this is happening, and you can prevent it, but you don't, you deserve the same punishment as the criminal. So I walked in the bedroom, and when I opened the door, Jason freaked out. He started screaming at me to get out, but I refused. I told him he was going to leave, and he laughed at me. I picked up what appeared to be a staff of some sort, and quickly discovered it pulled apart into 2 small swords. This is where I messed up. I pointed the swords at him, and he looked me dead in the eyes and says, "You don't have the balls." So I stabbed him 4 times in the abdomen, collapsing one lung and causing a small cut to the wall of his liver. He dropped to the ground and had coughed up blood with less than a minute, so I called the ambulance. The ambulance came with the police, and after speaking to the people in the apartment, they arrested me and brought me to booking. This is what happened during the court case. I was arrested because I called the ambulance, and the cops that came with decided they had enough for an arrest. The reason I was charged was that, as far as the ADA determined, Jason wasn't in the actual act of rape, and even if he had been planning to, I should have called the cops instead. I used deadly force in a situation that called for a less drastic response. Initially, they were determined to take me to trial in an attempt for a 60-month prison sentence. Then my lawyer, a real lawyer, not a public defender, had his investigator contact some witnesses. They made statements that he then brought to the prosecution. They responded by offering me 21 months incarceration with 15 years probation. I refused their offer and took my attorney's advice to counter-offer the same sentence with no probation. The prosecutor accepted, and we made a plea bargain. The day I went to court to have the plea agreement reviewed and accepted by the judge ruled that the sentence was too harsh, considering the circumstances, and that I was the one to call the ambulance. So he asked if the prosecutor was prepared to accept a lighter sentence recommended by the court. The prosecutor agreed, and I was returned to my cell. 3 days later, I returned to the courtroom and pled guilty, receiving a 15-month prison sentence with no probation. I had already sat for 7 months awaiting trial, and combined with the good time I had earned, I only had 5 left. I did my time, got out, found my wife, and have just tried to live since then. Thank you all for your interest and for reading. If there are other questions, please feel free to ask, but I do reserve the right not to answer any I'm not comfortable with. I was in a solitary confinement cell for 1 whole year in a county jail. During that year, I never spoke to anyone other than simple yes, no from guards or to my girlfriend on the phone during my 30 minutes a day out of my cell. The other 23 plus were in a small, windowless box that was freezing cold all year round. The thing I remember the most is shivering all the time, day and night. I was always cold. I also never once saw the sun for the entire year, yet they always left the big bright halogen lights in my cell on 24/7 day and night. My eyesight got really messed up in there, and it was easy to lose concept of time, as there were also no clocks or anything to mark periods of time. The guards were the second worst part. They would commit psychological warfare and always be doing things to F with me, like pounding on my door in the middle of my night. Imagine a shotgun blast in a confined space. These doors were metal and hinged to metal, so it would make ear-deafening blasts. They often would raid the cells and rip up any personal photos, even though they had no right to. They would steal your books and throw them in the trash can along with wet food, just outside of your cell, just to F with you, so you had nothing to do and couldn't educate yourself. The guards were monsters. The food was also horrible. In just 6 months, I had lost 85 pounds. I couldn't stomach the trash they sent us. Stale bread every day, so hard it could chip a tooth. Dehydrated vegetables that they always forgot to rehydrate, so it was like half crunchy old peas. The meat was awful, if it was even meat. I wouldn't even think about touching it. By the time the year was over, I honestly looked 100% like those Auschwitz Jews or like one of those starving Ethiopians. TLDR. So the first thing I did when I got out was go to Denny's. I got an all-American Grand Slam with pancakes, bacon, sausage, egg, hams, hash brown, butter, and orange juice. I ate every bite and loved it. I was accompanied by my very supportive family and my loving girlfriend, who seemed to want to cry seeing me eat after how famished I was. I stayed the next few nights in a very expensive 5-star hotel, omitted name for privacy, with my girlfriend, and mostly stayed as low-key as possible for the next few days. The first thing I bought the next day were new clothes, as I'd been wearing an orange jumpsuit for a year before. And if anyone cares what I did to wind up in that situation, my crime was an accident. I didn't willingly know I committed any crime when I did. It was a mistake and involuntary, but it didn't matter one bit when I was sentenced. Apparently, some girl I met on OkCupid lied about her age, saying she was 18 when I was 22, when she was really 16. We dated a few times, but the whole time she was under the guise she was 18, and I believed her. This was years ago, before I met who my current girlfriend is. In my book, cheating would be a bigger crime than the one I committed accidentally. However, the country disagrees, and now I'm a sex offender for life. Just a word of advice. I live 2 blocks from the local county jail. Well, when the guys get out, they walk down my street. On numerous occasions, I'd say 8 out of 10, they ask me for shit like money and cigarettes. I'm usually polite. Sorry, I can't help, but congrats on your release. But one guy approached me one night. I was coming home from work at 2 a.m. with my kids, and he asked me for a ride. No. Come on, don't be effed up. I just got out of jail. In that case, hell no. What the F? Like that was going to make it better? I just said no again. It's 2 a.m. I have my kids and I don't know you. He then flipped out and started cussing at me. So I improvised and started yelling out toward my front door, "Butch, get your effing gun. This guy's flipping out." He ran off, LOL. There's no Butch, but it was scary. Got high as F. Found an easy girl to hang out with. Took an hour-long shower, followed by an hour-long bath, and ate as much food as possible. I'm 21 and have spent more than 2 years of my life locked up. To give someone who's never been away from the free world an idea, even getting dropped off at Walmart and walking around with other free citizens all day, it's heaven compared to the last night in jail. Best night there. My best friend's stepbrother was in and out of prison the entire time I knew him. He's dead now. I remember the first time he got out, we went to stay with his dad, friend's stepdad. I was 16 and asked him what he wanted to do. All he said was drink Mountain Dew, smoke cigarettes, and watch hockey. We also took him to some CD shop so he can buy a few albums. He was a super smart dude, but eventually started hanging out with the wrong people, started drinking heavily and doing drugs, and went back in. About 18 months later, he got back into his troubled habits and went back in, got out again on parole, and was even more reckless than ever. It's hard for me to say anything super bad about the guy, because I knew him when he was normal and not taking a bunch of drugs and hanging with skeezy-ass corn cobs. I sat outside and just breathed the fresh air. Nobody was allowed to go outside, even for rec, where I was. Smelling the outside air was revitalizing. It was so nice to inhale something other than the smell of musty urine and stale cleaning chemicals. I can still remember stepping outside for the first time vividly. It was around 6 a.m. in November. It was dark and overcast. The gusts of wind blew the slight drizzle of rain against the biting snow on the ground. The air was full of the smell of wet leaves and snowmelt. I could hear the bustle of the early morning traffic in the distance, echoing off the river a few hundred yards next to me, all being mixed in with the sounds of more and more birds waking up and singing their songs. I just sat there for about an hour taking all that in while I waited for my ride. It's unreal going from the sound of loud TVs, people shouting, and metal doors slamming and buzzing everywhere to the tranquil quiet that was just outside. We had a 500-mile-plus drive from one state to my home, but my father and stepmother picked me up at the gate. I'd been in for close to a decade, so it was a bit intense for me. We stopped at a gas station 10 miles out so they could check directions. I went in to just pee, and I was intending to buy a pack of M&Ms or something, but I was overwhelmed just by the bright colors. We had to stop at a nearby city to grab some paperwork, and so that first hour I sat in the back of the car and realized after a while that I was deliberately avoiding looking out the window, focused on my new cell phone, actually, programming numbers in and stuff. After all that time, I had some weird paranoid thing that they might think they had made a mistake and come back after me, even though I had finished my term. When we got to said city, we stopped in a Target so I could pick up some over-the-counter meds I have to take every day and bought a pack of gum. We also stopped at a Best Buy and I bought a copy of Valtari by Sigur Rós and listened to that on the way home. We ate at a Hardee's. I had seen ads for the grilled cheese bacon burger. It was horrible, lukewarm and greasy, and I barely ate half of it. Did our paperwork and drove the rest of the way back. We stopped a couple hours out from home and ate dinner with my sister at a Cracker Barrel. Much better, thank you. Then got in around 10 or 11. I took a good shower and intended to go straight to bed, but I couldn't get to sleep. Ended up awake overnight and watching my folks' HD TV, the first time I'd seen high-def content and a 50-inch flat screen. I drank coffee most of the day, had a great breakfast, went and reported to all the people I had to report to, and went to see the progress being made on the place where I was going to be living. So really my first day or days or weeks were so insanely busy, I couldn't even really relax all that much. It was better that way. Even now, several months later, I'm fraught with the occasional paranoia that they're going to come back after me. Being on probation is part of that paranoia, so I try to stay as busy as I can so I don't get worried. I was institutionalized in a state rehab for a year when I was 17. No friends to call, no freedoms, no music, no smoking cigarettes, nothing. The night I got out, my mom refused to let me come home, and my father picked me up. As we stepped into his car, I realized I could touch the radio for the first time in a little over a year. He smacked my hand away and said he had a surprise. Full blast on the radio in the parking lot in front of the building, he played "We Gotta Get Out of This Place if it's the last thing we ever do." He hugged me and told me he loved me and could stay with him for as long as I needed. That was the best day of my life. We went home, ordered Chinese food, and watched South Park episodes until the sun came up. This was the best day of my life. I think a lot of these stories are good, and I think that hearing people say that they either learned from whatever they did while they were inside and improve their lives for the better, that's great. That one particular story really struck a chord with me, so it's good, Dad. Nice. Well, I was released 3 times, so I'll give you the short version of the 3 releases. By the way, we called getting released hitting the bricks. I thought I'd throw that in there. So the first time hitting the bricks, after being paroled from a 4-year bit, I tried to do the right thing. I just went home to my wife at the time with no drugs or drinking. We cuddled and did some fiddling. The marriage didn't last as her infidelities came to light and led to a divorce. After the divorce, I realized girls really liked me a lot, and I was living wide open. I was effing more girls than I ever thought imaginable. Drugs and drinking were back on the menu, and I started hanging out with some of the heavyweights I met in jail. Not knowing how to live as an honest man, I soon wound up back in the Bing. After flattening another 4-year bit, my second release was a blur. I had no family, and a friend who was a program director for a local radio station picked me up. I had around $800 in gate money, not a lot, but not bad for 1983, and we bought some coke and reefer. We went back to his house and partied with him, his girlfriend, and some friends I called. We hit the town, and I remember only bits of it. I woke the next morning to find me watch, a rather expensive one, and my wallet on the front lawn. No pussycat was to be had that time. By now, my reputation preceded me. The cops were well aware who I was, and even though I was truly innocent, I wound up doing a 6-month bit for the manufacturing and distribution of a controlled substance, cocaine. That 6-month bit was harder to do than the other 8 years because I was really innocent. Anyway, on my last release, I went home to my girlfriend, who was the ex-wife of a well-known man. She was 14-carat crazy, probably more crazy than me. That time I just went home and had a quiet evening at a couple clubs and then went home. She was into all kinds of freaky sex, and if I were to go into details, it would just be crazy. Fast forward to today. I changed my ways profoundly. It does get boring, but I learned that boring stretches are often peaceful times in disguise. I don't hang with the wise guys anymore, and I'm married to a woman who is far better than I ever deserved. As a correctional officer, I'm generally happy for the guys getting out. I've worked transport a few times, where we take them to the departing unit to be released, and 90% of them are just stone cold silent the entire 5-hour drive. I don't usually start conversations, but the last time I see them, I always tell them to stay safe and don't ever let me catch your ass at my unit again. I've only really had a long convo with a couple of guys about their fears and what they want to do when they get out. I mean, some of these guys have been locked up for 20 plus years. They see the outside world in the news every day, but some of them are scared shitless of actually being in it. From their perspective, it's just like being in a fishbowl and seeing everything going on around you, then one day being thrown out of your bowl into the whole big mess of things. Some are scared, some are excited, and some are tired. Most of their fears come from slipping back into their old ways, the ones I've talked to anyway. I mean, it must stink for them to go be fresh out with a felony and be 40 plus years old. Where the hell are you going to work? Go make minimum wage somewhere versus going back to dealing, making $3,000 a week, hoping you don't get caught again? Decisions. I got released early in the morning in Florida, about 4:30 a.m. I had just served a 42-month sentence. My girlfriend at the time picked me up and we went to Denny's. I remember staring at my plate for 5 minutes in awe. I didn't go to sleep after I got out. We went home and laid in bed and had sex, which didn't last very long. Around 11 a.m., we went to get a monster 2-pound sub sandwich from this place, La Spada's in Fort Lauderdale, and sat on the beach for the rest of the day with a cooler of Coronas. There's nothing like hearing your name and then pack it up afterwards on your release date. Nothing has ever matched the happiness of that moment. 4 years later, I have a son and a wife and my own business in North Carolina. Feels good, man.